May 1945. Southern Germany. Inside a temporary Allied interrogation center, one of the most senior commanders in Hitler's military sits beneath a dim light, staring across a wooden table at American intelligence officers. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt is exhausted. He is 69 years old. The war is over for him. Less than a week earlier, he had commanded German forces across Western Europe, overseeing defenses from the coast of Normandy to the Rhine River. Now he is a prisoner, answering the same question that nearly every captured German general will soon hear. Why did Germany lose? Rundstedt answers like a professional soldier. First, Allied air superiority. German troops could barely move during daylight without being hunted from the sky. Second, fuel shortages. Tanks stood idle. Aircraft remained grounded. Entire offensives stalled before they even began. Third, shattered railroads. Allied bombing had destroyed Germany's transportation system so thoroughly that supplies often never reached the front. 3 reasons: air power, fuel, railways. Clean answers. Military answers. But there is something he never mentions. Something he likely never fully understood. Not artillery. Not tanks. Not bombers. Trucks. Not the trucks carrying shells or gasoline. The other trucks. The ones carrying coffee, fresh pastries, music records, magazines from home, newspapers written for American soldiers. And inside those trucks, young American women, many college-educated, volunteers from places like Ohio, Indiana, and Connecticut, driving through freezing rain and artillery-damaged roads for one simple purpose: to hand an exhausted 19-year-old infantryman a hot donut, a cup of coffee, and ask him one question. Where are you from, soldier? The German military machine had words for logistics. It had words for firepower, movement, supply chains, and battlefield coordination. But it had no language for what the Americans were doing. No doctrine explained why a nation fighting the deadliest war in human history would dedicate fuel, vehicles, manpower, and shipping space to comfort. Why send mobile kitchens close to combat? Why station cheerful women near shattered crossroads only a few miles behind active fighting? Why invest in morale with the same seriousness as ammunition? The answer mattered more than anyone realized. Because these trucks were not luxuries. They were weapons. Not weapons of destruction. Weapons of endurance. This is the story of the Doughnut Dollies. The women who followed the American army across Europe. The mobile morale system that Germany never truly understood. And strangely enough, this story begins not in the Second World War, but inside a rain-soaked tent during another war entirely. October 1917. Eastern France. For more than a month, rain had turned military camps into oceans of mud. American troops arriving near the Western Front found themselves cold, exhausted, soaked, and painfully homesick. Inside one small Salvation Army tent stood a 28-year-old woman from Huntington, Indiana. Her name was Helen Purviance. She had not come to France to fight. She carried no rifle. She wore no military rank. Her mission sounded almost absurd given the circumstances. Help soldiers feel human again. The conditions were miserable. Mud reached above the ankles. Rain rarely stopped. Supplies were inconsistent. The men, sleeping nearby, were tired, frightened, and thousands of miles from home. Helen and another Salvation Army worker, Margaret Sheldon, spent their days making small comforts however they could. Fudge, pies, anything warm, anything familiar, anything that reminded frightened young Americans that life still existed beyond trenches and artillery fire. Then someone suggested donuts. Nobody remembers exactly who first said it. The historical record never fully settled the question. But the idea stuck. The problem was equipment. There was none. No proper kitchen. No bakery tools. No organized system. So Helen improvised. A wine bottle became a rolling pin. A baking powder tin became a cutter. For the hole in the center, they reportedly used an empty shell casing. The frying pan was so small it could only handle 7 donuts at once. Helen later remembered kneeling on the floor while frying them over an open flame. 7 at a time. That first batch went to nearby soldiers. One private reportedly joked after tasting one, "If war comes with these, maybe I can survive it." The reaction was immediate. Men lined up. Then more arrived. By the next day, demand had doubled. Soon hundreds of donuts were being made daily. Eventually thousands. Across American camps, Salvation Army volunteers began copying the idea. Makeshift donut stations appeared near the front. Some cooked in abandoned kitchens. Others fried donuts over open fires. In some places, soldiers claimed helmets became cooking equipment. Improvisation became tradition. The women serving them earned a nickname, the Donut Girls. And what looked small from the outside was quietly becoming something enormous. Because the donut itself was never really the point. A soldier already had food. Army rations provided calories. That was not the issue. What soldiers lacked was warmth, recognition, human connection. The donut represented something larger. A message from home. An unspoken reminder that somebody cared whether they survived. Imagine a frightened 20-year-old standing ankle deep in mud after weeks near artillery fire. No letters arriving. No family nearby. No certainty he will still be alive tomorrow. Then suddenly, someone hands him hot coffee and fresh food, smiles, and treats him like an ordinary person instead of a military serial number. That changes something. Not physically, psychologically, emotionally. Military leaders would later spend decades studying morale, resilience, and combat fatigue. But in 1917, nobody had academic language for what these women had accidentally discovered. Tiny comforts could stabilize exhausted soldiers. Sometimes better than orders. Sometimes better than discipline. When the First World War ended, soldiers came home carrying memories of gas attacks, shellfire, fear, and loss. But strangely, many also remembered donuts. Warm donuts in freezing mud. A strange memory to survive war. Yet they remembered it. Enough that in 1938, the Salvation Army officially created National Donut Day to honor the women who served troops during World War I. At the time, it felt like a small tribute to a forgotten story. Nobody imagined what was coming next. Because another war was already approaching. And this time, America would not simply repeat the idea. America would industrialize it. December 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. America enters another world war. But military planners understood something dangerous almost immediately. This war would not resemble the last one. American soldiers would fight thousands of miles from home. Not for months. For years. Across deserts, frozen forests, ruined cities, and oceans. And somewhere inside the American military establishment, an uncomfortable question emerged. How do you keep millions of young men emotionally functioning in places where fear becomes routine? The answer began with memory. Veterans from the First World War still talked about the women who served coffee and donuts in muddy camps back in France. Small gestures. Huge emotional effect. The American Red Cross paid attention. One man especially, Harvey Gibson, a wealthy New York banker who had seen firsthand how morale worked during World War I. He understood something many officers missed. Food mattered, but familiarity mattered more. A soldier fighting overseas did not only need ammunition. He needed reminders of home, someone to laugh with, someone who did not speak to him like a superior officer, someone who looked him in the eyes and remembered he was still human. So Gibson asked a question that sounded ridiculous to many military professionals. What if comfort could be organized like logistics? What if morale itself became part of the war machine? That question led to one of the strangest military support systems ever created. The Clubmobile. At first, they looked almost harmless. In Britain, old buses were transformed into traveling morale stations. Inside sat donut makers, coffee equipment, phonographs playing American music, magazines, and places for tired servicemen to sit for a few precious minutes. But once Allied troops crossed into Europe, buses became impractical. The battlefield moved too fast. Roads disappeared under shellfire. Entire towns vanished overnight. The solution became tougher. Military trucks. The same rugged vehicles carrying fuel and ammunition suddenly carried something else. Coffee urns, music, pastries, and 3 women volunteers packed into the back. The soldiers soon gave them a nickname. The Doughnut Dollies. These women were not randomly selected. The Red Cross treated recruitment seriously. Applicants had to meet strict requirements. They needed education. Most were college graduates. They had to be physically strong enough to survive brutal conditions. Emotionally resilient. Friendly. able to handle constant social pressure. Many applicants were rejected. The women chosen received training that surprised outsiders. They learned vehicle maintenance because breakdowns near the front happened constantly. They learned communication skills, how to talk to nervous soldiers, how to comfort someone without sounding fake, how to stay warm, calm, and cheerful in miserable conditions. Because their job was strange. Part mechanic, part counselor, part older sister, part reminder of home. And, soon, they followed the American army into chaos. Picture northern France after D-Day. Roads jammed with armor. Destroyed villages. Rain. Mud. The sound of distant artillery never fully disappearing. Then somewhere a few miles behind active fighting, soldiers suddenly spot a truck. Coffee steaming into cold air. Music drifting softly through speakers. Young women handing out fresh donuts. For exhausted infantrymen rotating off combat lines, the experience often felt unreal. Some had spent days terrified, covered in mud, barely sleeping, watching friends disappear beside them. And then suddenly, someone asked their name, their hometown, whether they wanted sugar in their coffee. It sounds small, almost laughably small, but war shrinks human expectations. Sometimes kindness feels bigger than survival. The Doughnut Dollies worked brutal schedules. Before sunrise, batter had to be mixed, oil heated, supplies organized. Then hours of serving began. Rain, snow, cold, sometimes enemy aircraft nearby, sometimes artillery close enough to hear. Some crews reportedly camouflaged their trucks to avoid attracting attention. Yet they kept showing up. Again and again. One soldier later remembered standing in line after days near the front, completely exhausted, only to hear someone cheerfully ask where he came from. He said the question nearly broke him emotionally. Not because it was dramatic. Because nobody had asked him anything normal in weeks. That was the secret. The donut itself mattered less than the interaction. This was emotional resupply, and America scaled it in ways almost impossible to imagine. Factories supplied ingredients. Specialized machines mass-produced donuts. The Red Cross expanded operations across continents. Millions upon millions were distributed during the war. At peak capacity, hundreds were produced every minute. But donuts were only one piece of something far larger. America built an entire morale ecosystem. Portable, Coca-Cola bottling plants followed troops overseas. Yes, actual bottling factories moved with the war. Military newspapers delivered baseball scores, jokes, headlines, and reminders of ordinary life. USO performers traveled enormous distances entertaining troops near dangerous zones. Comedians, musicians, actors, sometimes performing close enough to hear distant gunfire. To outsiders, especially enemy observers, it seemed absurd. Why waste resources? Fuel was precious. Shipping, space mattered. Every truck had military value. Why spend effort delivering comforts during history's largest war? Because American commanders increasingly believed morale was combat power. General George Marshall understood it. Dwight Eisenhower understood it. An exhausted soldier who still believed home cared about him fought differently than one who felt abandoned. He recovered faster, endured longer, kept moving, and perhaps most importantly, he held on to something war constantly tried to destroy: hope. Meanwhile, Germany struggled with a different philosophy. Its military tradition emphasized discipline, sacrifice, obedience, endurance through hardship, but emotional support on an industrial scale. That barely existed. German generals studied tanks, production numbers, air superiority, supply shortages. Yet many failed to recognize something happening directly in front of them. American soldiers were not only supplied better, they were emotionally reinforced, fed, psychologically, supported socially. The United States had found a way to make soldiers feel remembered. And remembered soldiers often fight harder. Which brings us back to May 1945. Southern Germany. Field Marshal Rundstedt answering questions after the collapse of Hitler's empire. Air power. Fuel shortages. Destroyed railroads. All true. But incomplete. Because somewhere behind every American advance stood trucks he never truly counted. Trucks carrying warmth, conversation, laughter, fresh coffee, music from home. Young women brave enough to drive through war simply to remind frightened soldiers that America had not forgotten them. Germany saw tanks, America saw people